the whole team at Faith for the Climate for doing this. I think currently, I would say it's very important for faith communities to be in the space. We've seen in the last couple of years, more and more faith leaders, community members speak out on the climate crisis, the environment, and so forth. But I think currently there's much more need, I would say, for more people of faith to be involved in this space. Because I guess it's the single most pressing, you could say, issue within humanity today. That though we have wars and economic crisis and so forth, but if there's no world, if we allow for this environmental crisis to continue, if the global ecology is affected, then even the air that we breathe and for our future generations to come will suffer the impact of what we do today. It's, I would say, quite pertinent that we're having this discussion in the build-up to COP26, because I would say that if we're continuously sidetracked by other very pressing issues, but if this is not taken into consideration, that there is an environmental crisis, then what we will find is that we will fall short of all of the targets that we've actually assigned for ourselves. So anyhow, though we require much more faith leaders and communities to be part of this, but slowly, with your help and for everything that you're doing across the country, we are finding that slowly but surely people are recognizing that there is a crisis and this crisis must be dealt with. I take that a stage forward. I find that the climate crisis or the environmental crisis, as you have it, if I was to use those terms very loosely, is something that we find straight after the 19th century. And after the Galilean trials, you find, at least within Europe, there isn't much emphasis on the climate crisis. It's only recently. In fact, we've seen an acceleration, at least within the religious world, with Pope Francis. But I want to take you back to 1966, and because our discussion is in relation to, at least from my perspective, Islam, take you back to 1966. A philosopher, a very eminent philosopher in the West, in America at the moment, retired philosopher by the name of Professor Sayed Razawi. He's a perennialist philosopher, but in 1966 in Chicago, he gives a talk which later on is formed into a book by the name of, I would say, Religion and Nature. And on the back of that, you find Lynn White also has a particular paper, a very famous Christian paper now, in terms of religion and the ecological crisis. And then from then onwards, you see an expansion take place in faiths, and the discussion actually happens within Europe or Western Christianity. And today this space, the vast majority of this space, is taken by Western Christianity, which is good in many ways, as it's influenced the rest of the world. But you do find places of the world where our religions do talk about climate, there is so far no impact. You see in Delhi, for example, the rivers becoming even more polluted. You go to China, for example, you see the smog increasing day by day. You look at parts of the East, you go to the Middle East, barren lands and so forth, right next to rivers whereby there were multiple different species of fish that over, you would say, 1 million species have been wiped out. So we have a responsibility. And I would say, speaking as a Muslim and representing the Muslim faith today, say that we have a responsibility. There is no bifurcation. If we go back to the Quran and the prophetic tradition, there is a unity that takes place between the spiritual and the material world. And as you've heard many a time from other, most probably Muslim speakers, that we are custodians. There is a level of guardianship that human beings have over creation. And so therefore, it is important for us to make sure that we're doing our part. And so therefore, there's a nexus between the self and the cosmos, which one finds within Islam. And again, you'll see the same in all other religions, and hopefully we'll have speakers coming later to discuss that. You look at Europe and see St. Francis of Assisi, for example, associated with the natural environment, going back to the 13th century, if I'm not mistaken. So similarly, you go back 1400 years ago, and here the Prophet of Islam through his own sayings, divinely inspired sayings in the Quran, you see a number of principles which are coming forward. Such principles as not to pollute or corrupt the land, principles in relation to, for example, sowing the seeds and planting trees, principles in terms of not polluting water, principles in respecting animals, which unfortunately today, if you look at the world of Islam, especially because of the, you could say, technological or modernization, scientific revolution that takes place, Islam moves away in the 19th century from its roots of balance. And you see an entire movement, at least in the last 100 years, take place, which is looking at more scientific methods, but forgetting that there was also a primal basis whereby you had environment and law which came together. So early parts of the 20th century, what you saw was a complete shift in Cairo, in Istanbul, and then from then onwards, the rest of the Islamic world, which moved away from its holistic approach, but it went more towards a legalistic approach or scientific approach. When I talk about science, I mean more modern technology. So it forgot that reality, which was the environment. And now today, slowly but surely, we are now rebalancing ourselves and coming back to understanding the sacred. And so this is what's important. I'm just going to finish off with the technical stuff so I can move on to more the practical stuff, which our communities have been applying within South London and across the UK. So really, I guess the technical stuff is that the Sharia, that you have the law, also deals with animals, the climate, the environment, biodiversity, and all the modern day, you could say, was loss and damage. All of that is dealt with within the Sharia, which has been parked for whatever reason. It is, I guess, our responsibility to make sure that we go back to that, as I would say, as Muslims. And by going back to it, I guess there's a number of things that we can do. You look at the world today, you see that, at least within the United Kingdom, 30.8% of purchased food is wasted. And so if we were to go today, at least a Muslim was to go today and see, there are principles around from anywhere between food wastage to, for example, the amount of carbon dioxide we emit. And it's all there. It just requires awareness. And so I guess this is something that we as our communities in South London are doing. I'd say three things. I'd say the first thing that we are doing is we are periodically having workshops to create awareness, because many people are not well versed in the technical language of what, for example, loss and damage is, biodiversity is, the difference between the ecology and the environmental crisis. What are the nuances? So currently we are periodically having workshops which look at the various different problems that we're facing today. I think the second thing which is important is that we are also applying for funds, especially within Scotland. You've got something which is known as the Climate Challenge Fund. There was about £10.3 million, which was up for grabs, you could say, by communities. And with that, they are building the buildings almost, or insulating their homes in such a way. I think they call it the CO2E. So we're working towards that as well. In fact, by 2030, there's a target that all of our centers, all of our mosques will be, off carbon footprint will be diminished to zero. So I guess in this way, there are multiple things that are taking place. The third thing, by the way, is this, that we are providing awareness for people to insulate their homes in a way that we're not wasting energy, for example. So there are a number of things that the community is doing, but I do feel that there needs to be a lot more awareness amongst the community members. And for that, I think that these particular workshops are of fundamental importance, that we can really create awareness, but at the same time, the religious angle too is important. Because what you find is that the sacred, and when I look at the creation, it's the sacred, is a medium between us and the Creator. You know, from an Islamic perspective, in the Quran, it says that God himself says that we will show you our signs on the horizons. When he talks about nature, the animals, the animal kingdom, plants, vegetation, and so forth, he talks about in a language of signs, that he calls it ayat. Similarly, when you look at the Quran, the verses of the Quran is an ayah, or ayat in plural. Similarly, you have that creation is the same thing. Just as the holy book for Muslims is the Quran, there's another holy book, and that's the book of creation outside. So for Muslims, it's very important for us to respect the world outside of us. But unfortunately, the only reason why this gets curtailed is because of the lack of information. So really, in the brief time, and I think my time is now coming to an end, 30 seconds or so, say within 30 seconds, I think that these workshops are extremely important. They're extremely important for us to come, to understand, to gain knowledge of our responsibilities, to gain awareness, to pass on that awareness, to coordinate and to help coordinate. But I think it also gives us an opportunity that we get multiple different religious perspectives. And ultimately, having listened to a number of them, be they from the basis of Hinduism or Judaism or Christianity, you'll see that there's a link there. For all of us, the natural world is sacred. And it's important for us to keep it like that, so that in the future, our children and our grandchildren can benefit. Thank you.